Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I am your host, David Rethemeyer, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Abraham Chen. This is an episode in our Pursuits series where we sit down with some of the students in our community who have gone on into particular career fields. So, Abe, who are we talking with this week?
David. Today, we are talking about building things. We're talking with our construction people. We have several of our students or alumni, actually, who have experience in construction or some in just carpentry. So this is a very interesting episode where we talk all the details about building things, again, in real life, but also many of the things that you wouldn't think of with construction that they have to deal with on a daily basis.
Oh, sounds like a fascinating conversation. So I think that we will go ahead and dive right into that. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the episode.
Hello, guys. Welcome onto the show. Very excited to have everyone on, especially the old friends. So let's start off with Wyatt. Can you tell us a bit about your involvement with Unbound and what your experience with construction is?
Yeah, so I started Unbound. I had to think about this when I was talking to Ezra a little while ago. Pretty sure 2017 is when I started, and I did my first two-thirds of my degree or so through Unbound before I transferred to Liberty University and finished out my degree with Liberty University online. So I'm an Unbound graduate. I did my degree in project management. I was pretty involved in Unbound community throughout my time there as well, and am still to some degree, although to a lesser extent. I've worked in construction for a long time. I worked for an excavating company for about 3 years, and for a landscaping company for about 2 years. And when I say landscaping, I don't mean lawn care. I mean more like installing drains, building retaining walls, things like that. And then I either worked for myself or did small part-time construction jobs off and on for another 2 or 3 years outside of that. And even right now, construction isn't my main thing that I do right now. I'm in seminary currently, but I do work in maintenance for the seminary where I study. So that's kind of my construction background.
Plenty of experience. We'd love to dig more into that in a second, but Ezra, we'll let you go next.
Yeah, I first enrolled in Unbound in 2016. Was there for about a year doing kind of my own path through. I hadn't gotten involved with the student community at all until actually Apex of 2017. That was kind of my first step into the community. Got pretty heavily involved there for a couple of years while I finished my associate's degree. Just did a AA and then continued to work in construction from there. I've been working construction, I guess all told, probably part-time about 10 years. I grew up, my dad runs his own construction company, and so I grew up working with him from a very young age with, being there, handing him shingles or helping mud drywall and just doing odd jobs. So I've done a lot of residential and commercial remodel and then some building as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. It sounds almost like you've been doing it a bit longer if you've been grown up with it. So there you go. Last, definitely not least, we have Caleb Rush. So tell us about your experience.
Yeah, sure can. I'd been peripherally involved with Unbound for a long time with siblings and whatnot. I became more involved in 2019 when I did the business and leadership program, which was kind of the precursor to the current Ascend program. It was kind of a package with leadership courses and capstone and base camp and all that. So I did that, got more involved there. And then I was an Ascend team leader in 2020, and I was on cabinet in 2021. That was a pretty cool experience and definitely deepened my involvement in the community. As far as construction, I definitely can't match either of you two. I've not been doing it nearly as long. I did remodeling for a guy, part-time 2 days a week for 2 years. And then for the last year and a few months, I've been working full-time in construction, doing new builds, remodels, additions, stuff like that. So
very cool. Very cool. So once again, on Pursuits, one thing that we want to explore is very much this experience of doing different roles and, what that has given you experience-wise. So, again, many of you guys mentioned how you guys did get started, whether it's through, family business or just through getting the job and whatnot. For you guys, and this is open to anyone, was there ever like a sort of interest, or what do you think interested you about the job? It could have been just a job to kind of transition, and that's totally fair. But was there ever anything that you felt like, was interesting or you actually enjoyed about being in construction?
Well, for me, when I first got my first like part-time job, I think I was 14 years old. Don't tell OSHA. And that job was just a job. I really didn't like it that much. It wasn't fun most of the time. As I got more and more experience, I enjoyed it more. But then I came to know a guy who owned an excavating company. And since I was a little kid, probably like every little kid, I really liked big machines. I mean, what's not to love? So I really wanted to go to work for the guy with the excavating company. And I ended up getting a job with him. And, to be honest, probably most days that job was just as miserable as the job I'd had previously. But then some days I got to run the big machines and it was just amazing. Running bulldozers and excavators and skid steers, it's really great. It's super fun. I probably love it as much today as I thought I would when I was a little kid. So that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about construction, was just running big machines. I'm a little kid at heart, to be honest. It's great.
I love the confirmation that basically the big machines are as cool as they look or appear. So thank you for confirming that, Wyatt. But yeah, Caleb, Ezra, any other thoughts on, again, I totally understand where, it started out kind of as a job, but was there something that you did enjoy or like you learned something in the process?
Wyatt, I must be in the wrong area of construction. I still don't get to spend hardly any time running big machines. So kind of disappointed. Maybe I need to find a different job.
Definitely do. Mm-hmm. If you can, get into the machines, man.
Get the big machines.
I take that back. I was running a skid loader just a couple weeks ago, but I mean, sort of running a skid loader, not exactly. Abe, to answer your question, I don't know. I always had sort of a superficial interest in construction, at least. I grew up, using tools. We had a pretty decent shop. My grandpa did a lot of woodworking and stuff like that. So I was kind of not really in the construction industry, but used to using tools and that sort of thing. So I was pretty excited about the opportunity to get to learn how to build stuff, even if I didn't want to do it for the rest of my life, just as like be able to work on my own house, that sort of thing. So
yeah, I definitely just kind of grew into it with watching my dad do construction, and he had all the tools there. I spent plenty of time as a very young kid building forts with my brothers from construction leftovers and stuff that my dad would bring back from job sites. And then I just kind of fell into that as working with my dad. I'm sure as with any job, there's days where you don't enjoy it, but overall I actually really enjoyed making things. You especially as you build, when you're doing a full build, you really get to see it come together from, there was just a patch of dirt here before, and then there's a full house. But then even in remodel, where you get to see something broken and within a few days, it's, you remodeled it and you have something really nice when you're done.
If we could continue to touch on that, Ezra, what were some of the aspects that you were almost the most challenging about your role? And again, I love how we have all you guys on who are doing different roles. So I would love to kind of hear about what was the most challenging aspect of your particular role of your job, or what was the hardest thing you had to do? Let's put it that way. Any stories?
Not necessarily the hardest, but definitely the least fun is always insulation work. Nobody enjoys that.
Well, Wyatt, give me your thumbs down. Tell us about your experience, Wyatt. Yeah, fill us in.
So first of all, I've done plenty of insulation work. Not plenty, actually. I've done maybe if you add it up, maybe a week or two worth of insulation work, and it's not fun. It's miserable. I hate it. For me, probably the most difficult, the hardest thing in construction was calling my boss or contacting a customer after I'd made a big mistake, which that happens. If you work in construction, it's going to happen, I guarantee, and it's something you just have to live with. And that's the difference for me, at least. Like, my own mistakes were always the difference between a good day and a bad day a lot of the time. Sometimes things can be really difficult and a job is actually really hard, but it's kind of satisfying. But if I make a mistake in that, it's just like, now the difficulties are my fault and it's not fun anymore. And this is applicable to just about all of life. Sometimes you make a mistake and you have to eat some humble pie, and you have to call your boss or contact a customer or something like that. And that, for me, was always the most difficult aspect of construction.
When you, not to hark on the mistakes, but that I think is fascinating, where when you have to work on construction, especially, was there anything that you learned from, especially this whole like making mistakes? And we in Unbound, we do talk about learning from failure, right? Fail soon, fail often, things like that. I look at some of the other career fields or positions or whatnot that we've talked about on Pursuits, and there is the reality that some careers or jobs have a bit more risk than others. For example, like we talked with EMS, with a lot of our fellow Unbounders who work in the medical field, and for them, a whoopsie is a lot worse, generally speaking, right? So I was just like curious, as you mentioned, Wyatt, like how difficult was it to deal with these mistakes? Of course, I'm sure like it depends on like what happened, but like, was there anything that you learned from that process of like, okay, we're building something went wrong. We have to change the timeline on the project. Let's shift things.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of different kinds of mistakes. One is unavoidable mistakes, and they happen, and you have to accept that. And one of the things that a couple of my bosses really helped me with and was influential in construction for me was kind of embracing just doing things that you don't know how to do, doing things that you've never done before, knowing that there are going to be mistakes in that. You can figure out how to solve those problems. And that is the nature of construction. No two jobs are the same. And so you're always going to end up with those things. And so those are maybe more problems than mistakes. But then there are the types of mistakes that are things that, you should know better. They're avoidable mistakes. They are things that you should know how to avoid, and you make them anyways. And I don't have anything particularly profound to say about those, except just take responsibility for your mistakes, first of all. No one ever likes working with anyone who won't take responsibility for their mistakes, especially if they try to put them on other people. And there are plenty of people like that in the construction business. Don't be like that. Take responsibility for your mistakes. Call the boss, call the customer, say, I goofed up. It's going to happen. And, we have probably a mid-level, how you would say that, the level of like how bad an error is. Like compared to EMS, a mistake in the construction site, not that big of a deal. But it does depend on the construction you're doing. Sometimes it means you have to break out some concrete you poured or fix a work truck or something like that. Ultimately, take responsibility for your mistakes and move on.
Any other thoughts from Caleb or Ezra?
Yeah, I'd say that kind of comes down to having learned from mistakes. There's kind of an attitude of learning from mistakes. That's something my father did really well at, is teaching us boys early allowing us to make mistakes in areas where it's not going to be a major consequence, so that you learn to understand the consequences of mistakes. And then you can take from that an attitude and an approach to your work where you actually you think through things far enough ahead that you avoid a lot of potential bigger mistakes. there's, at least from the side of the remodel that I've done, there's a lot of it that is just problem solving and understanding, if we do this in the remodel, it's, what does that do? We did a lot of, like I said, residential, but also commercial remodel. And you have to, especially on commercial, you have to think through that most of the time the places weren't shut down all the way. And so you have to deal with what are the consequences of shutting down, this area or that area. And sometimes that's as simple as I've actually had death threats because we had the Pepsi machine shut down. But you think through the consequences of, you have the Pepsi machine shut down. And so you think that way the whole time, if at least I, have think through the consequences of what a mistake would be. And not from the side of being afraid of it, because you're going to make mistakes. You can prevent a lot of mistakes by kind of thinking ahead.
Yeah, I have very little to add to what you guys have said. But I guess one thing I was thinking about is a lot of the big mistakes I can think of that I've made in construction were all due to were all the result of a kind of a series of little mistakes that I made leading up to that. Like, I mismanaged my time, so I'm running behind, so I'm in a hurry, so I'm trying to cram too much stuff in, so then I'm late, so then I leave the job site in a rush and don't think about what I'm doing, and I, run the trailer into a fence post. Purely hypothetically speaking, of course, I've never actually done that. Just kidding. No, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I can't think of too many just like catastrophic mistakes that were just like instantaneous. It's often for me, I can back up and be like, oh yeah, I deserve that. I could have seen that coming.
No, I hear you. So with these things, I really appreciate that as someone, again, genuinely who has not been in the industry, those are things that I don't even really think about, right? Oh, what to shut down and how that's going to affect whatever it is, the flow of traffic through the area, or just, what you need to be aware of. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more later on. But just, again, having that awareness of how to make mistakes, of consequences, of how to do that right, and just how construction affects a lot of areas that, again, I might not have thought of. So that's really cool. What are some of the pros and cons that you feel like you guys have working in construction? So what are the things that are fulfilling, such as you guys have mentioned, being able to build things, or what are some of the more the difficult things, the cons that are like, yep, ready to move on? What do you guys think?
I think for me, one of the pros would be just the transferable skills that I've been surprised by in construction. I think specifically with working with people, I guess I didn't really anticipate going into construction that working with people would be a huge part of that, which was definitely not true. It is a huge part of that. And I've actually been thinking about this recently. One of the unique things about managing in construction, and Ezra and Wyatt, you can see what you think about this. Most of the time, especially if you're doing like a new build, you're working with a client who has just paid more money than they ever have before for a once in a lifetime purchase. And then you're kind of the in-between guy between a subcontractor who this is one of 200 jobs they do a year, right? Like it's a drop in the bucket. So it's like an interesting situation there where you have to kind of connect the dots between those two. And that's just more intense than I anticipated. So learning how to navigate that, how to work with people, and even just how to work with your coworkers during day after day of a lot of work, a lot of sweat, a lot of frustration. So yeah, I think the people side has been the biggest pro as a transferable skill. Yeah, there's cons, I'm sure. I don't know. Yeah, there's some projects that are super fun, and then there's some projects that are just incredibly monotonous and not super entertaining. And after spending 10 hours of doing something, you're just like, man, I wish I was doing something else right now. But
that's true on any job, though, that I've ever had. Is there's days when it's not the most enjoyable. But I would say one really big pro for me with construction is the skill that I can take and then give that experience to other people. So I really enjoy, had some good opportunities over the last couple of years here with people in my church where people had house projects and they didn't know anything about construction, had never done any construction. So I went and helped one family reset a whole bunch of their doors so they could actually have opening and closing doors in their house, and just other projects like that I find really really rewarding. Even though I'm not going into it trying to run my own business or even charging them. It's me just giving my time in fellowship together, and that's really rewarding.
Like having a very useful skill is amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I don't know what Caleb and Ezra were talking about. For me, construction was always just sunshine and roses. No, I'm just kidding. For me, I think one of the biggest pros is the enjoyment of seeing a job go from A to Z. Ezra mentioned this earlier on, seeing like a home go from it's a mound of dirt, and then someone has a home. I haven't done much house building. But on a big landscaping project, you'll have someone's backyard go from a muddy mess that just has weeds everywhere to, 2 weeks later, they've got a really nice retaining wall, a backyard with grass, a drainage system to where it won't stay muddy, and nice flower beds. And it's just really fun to see the process of it going from something that just looks terrible and is completely unuseful to the customer to, after a period of time later, it looks really nice, and you can look at it and say, hey, we did a good job with that. That's one of the biggest pros for me.
Yeah, and I love something that all of you guys have mentioned where, Caleb, you're talking about transferable skills. One of the coolest things, and I believe I've said this on the podcast, but I'll say it again, it's worth mentioning how we've done many episodes of Unbound Pursuits where we've gotten to talk with many different career fields. And it's so awesome to see how genuinely there are some transferable skills that are used in every single career path. And a huge one is communication. If you can or can't work with people, that is going to make or break whatever you do, whether you're a writer to here in construction or obviously media, EMS, artists, just real estate, like all these different things, IT even, you have to work with people. And that is going to propel you to success in the field that you're in. Since we're talking about construction specifically, was there any other transferable skills that you guys have picked up on over the years? And again, some of you guys right now, like Wyatt you mentioned, are in seminary, right? So you're not like doing construction full time, or Ezra, you're not doing construction or completely in that industry anymore. Are there any skills that have helped you as you move on?
I would say problem solving is a really big one for construction, especially having done remodel, because there's so many unknowns when you go to start doing a remodel job, and they're so varied. Every single one is different. I would say that's a really big one. For me also was the ability to kind of see what needs done and be able to start doing that before having to be told to by my boss, which was my dad, almost all of my time working in construction, but just through his training and kind of spending enough time on the job site, you start to see the things that just need done.
I'm sure that there are some. I can't think of any right now. I mean, you could say work ethic, maybe. I know that does carry over. Problem solving is something everybody uses at points in their life. Right now, I'm in a very academic setting, which is kind of the opposite in some ways from where I was, but just the ability to know what are the requirements for assignments and things like that, which I was already doing that in college. And so I don't know how well I do at that though, because I haven't, gotten grades back for my papers or anything like that. So maybe I'm doing terribly at that. I don't know.
I guess we'll find out by the time this podcast episode comes out. Well, check in on your brother Wyatt.
That's right.
You might not be doing so good.
That's right.
But
we will find out how transferable the skills are.
Yes, sir. I do like how you mentioned earlier where, you also at the seminary, you're at help with, things around the seminary. And once again, I would say that is just the fact that you do construction and are able to build or fix things is a huge skill that I certainly I'm not that handy with fixing or building things. And that is just already in itself a huge gift, a huge transferable skill that you can use to, fix stuff wherever you are. Caleb, I know you were the one who kind of started the conversation about transferable skills, but is there anything else that you can think of that has been helpful for you?
Yeah, I think Ezra and Wyatt said some good stuff. Wyatt, you said work ethic, or I was thinking maybe discipline would be something. And I probably have a little less experience with this than you guys, since you guys have kind of moved past construction and done other things, and I'm still doing it right now. But yeah, 100% problem solving. I think one interesting thing that I learned would be that there are a lot more principles in construction than I realized, but there's also a lot more room for creativity than I at first realized, especially with like remodeling and stuff like that. So that's been challenging because there's a lot to learn, but also freeing that I don't have to do this one exact way. There's room for creativity and problem solving in that. Yeah, I've been thinking about ways I can transfer that over to other areas of my life as well. With
construction specifically, there is specific skills that you learn, kind of a mastery of this tool set you're going to be using, which depending on what construction, right, you're doing is different. But you can see a theme in what we're pulling out. Those are all skills you could learn in any job if you're approaching it well. If you're approaching it to learn, right? It's not that I don't think construction is particularly suited better than another role, than another job to teach you problem solving or work ethic or there is something about hard manual labor that does quickly either you fail at it or you do learn a discipline to continue at something hard.
Very much agree. On that note, I am curious, it's not exactly in the notes, so I'm going to throw this question at you guys. But I really wanted to ask, what was the most interesting project that you guys have worked on? For example, Ezra, you've mentioned many remodeling works, or Wyatt getting to play with the big machines. So yeah, again, the question is, what do you think is the most interesting project you've worked on in your years in construction?
That one's pretty easy for me. We had a remodel that we did in the area I grew up in. We have a lot of, back that up a little. The frost level there is 3 feet. So you have to dig 3 feet down in order to get your foundation below the frost level, so the ground doesn't heave and either break the foundation or freeze your piping. So then most people dig either 5 or 8 with that. Older houses were all done with these like 5 foot tall cellar basements. They're not finished. It's still just like a dirt floor. Anyways, there was a house we were contracted to come work on. The old foundation was collapsing in on itself. So the whole house was about ready to just fall down into a hole, but it was in a river plain. So you couldn't legally go outside of the initial footprint of the house. The zoning was such where you had to stay legally inside of the footprint of the house. So we ended up doing a project where we put the house up on big I-beams. We ran them underneath the house, lifted the house up just a little bit, actually, as far as the lift, right? We moved it maybe half an inch up. The homeowner took a skid steer and excavated underneath their house. And then we poured a full basement under the house, full height, set the house back down. That was a very unique and interesting project, working, for a couple months underneath this house that's sitting on stilts.
I'm sure strengthened your faith a little bit.
There was one time it came a little too close to coming down.
Whoa.
We had an out of season heavy rainstorm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Very interesting.
I don't have anything super interesting off the top of my head. I would think if I could think for a little while, I might come up with something more interesting. But like not too long ago, at the landscaping company where I worked, we did a large retaining wall job. Large for us, we did fairly small jobs, but there were like 5 separate retaining walls on this property. These people came in and they completely redid their backyard. They put in a pool. They had probably 20 trees taken down out of their backyard. And so their backyard was completely redone. We had to haul out several dump truck loads of dirt. And when we did this job, I had built maybe like 2 retaining walls in my life, small ones. And I had never built a retaining wall with like the type of material we were using before. And so it wasn't interesting because of anything that's like inherently interesting about the job. It was just interesting because it was new. It was a much larger job than what we normally did. And it was just a learning experience. And on top of that, it was me and on average, probably one other guy who did the whole thing. So it was just very hands-on the whole time.
For sure. I'm sure you learned a ton when it's just you have to do everything.
I think for me, I'm just trying to think about what was the coolest project we worked on or the most interesting. About a year ago, we did a remodel and addition. It was basically a new build by the time they were done. But the original house was a log building that they had records of it back to the 1860s. So that's not records of it being built. That's just records of it being there. They don't know how much older it was than that. And of course, long since they'd put siding over it and then I think siding over top of that again. But I enjoyed that a lot. Just going back in, exposing those old wood beams. We re-chinked it all, and yeah, it was just an interesting project, and it was super satisfying to get it done and look at all those old beams, and that was just a super cool project. Refinished. I don't know. I can't imagine they were the original floors, but some really old pine floors in there that we refinished, and it was cool. It was a lot of fun.
Hey everyone, David here with a brief break in the episode to just wanted to let you guys know about one of Unbound's brand new programs that we have just launched. If you have been familiar with Unbound for a little while now, and you might know about our Ascend program, which is Unbound's higher education alternative. We are actually now running a program called Ascend Semester, where instead of Ascend being a year-long program, Semester packs all of the great things about Ascend. Things like our project-based education approach. You get to come to a live event. You get to work through a project with an Ascend team. You get to participate in the amazing Unbound community and have all of the same great experiences for personal growth and development that is offered by the main Ascend program, but it's all packed into one semester. So enrollment for that program is open right now. You can get the cheapest price available for early enrollment if you enroll this month in October, but enrollment is open right now. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go check it out at beunbound.us/semester. That will be linked in the show notes below as well. Now, back to the episode.
Well, here's another question, and that would be, having all your experience in construction, and Caleb, what you were talking about with, stripping a building down and understanding how the process of building a structure or whatever it is, retaining walls and all these different things. What do you think is something that most people, like the average person, would not understand about the process? Whether it's like how things are built or the amount of time or effort put into certain things. What do you feel like is something that you wish people like understood more about construction?
Yeah, I would say the importance of water and making sure water goes where it's supposed to go and does not go where it's not supposed to go. I can probably safely say every single construction job I've worked on, that is one of the most important aspects of every job, is making water go where you want it to go and making sure it does not go where you don't want it to go.
I could concur with that. I've done a lot of water repair work.
Yeah, no, that sounds like something that's like, yeah, duh, like obvious, but truly, that's something that I've not thought about that with construction. You always have to deal with water. So I appreciate that. Another way to ask the question would be, what are some of the things that are the whole dumb things that people will say about construction? You're like, well, that's not how things work.
I'm thinking, I feel like the biggest thing that we like to complain about when the customers aren't around, just amongst ourselves, would be more selection choices than anything else. Most clients will let you do what you need to do, but we love to bang our heads against the wall and be like, what are they thinking? This is going to look terrible, which is none of our business. We don't ever do it when they're around, but I don't know. That's a hard thing to nail down because that's totally our opinion.
No, and that's a good point though, which is funny, like the whole artistic choice thing for sure.
There can often come kind of a clash between what's practically doable and artistic. A joke that kind of sums it up that I've heard a lot in construction is the construction guy asks, well, do you know why there won't be any architects in heaven? And it's because Jesus was a carpenter. and so the funny behind that is that often is kind of a tension between an idea that somebody has a vision that they'll have of how they want this to look, and then the reality of you can't do that. Whether it be just structurally it doesn't work, or physically there's no way to for manpower to do that. To the most common one is expectation of being able to do more than they can with the amount of money they have. That's universal in every field.
There's definitely often an expectation with clients that if they can find something cheaper themselves and give to us to use, it'll save them lots of money. And in our experience, it's almost always way more expensive to use old barnwood to do something, to use an old door that they found for cheap, to put an old window in for cheap. Just the added labor is so much higher that it's almost never cost effective to pay someone else to do that. And that's just something people can't wrap their heads around often. So yeah, that's just something we've run into a lot recently.
Very interesting, for sure. I think that's another very interesting point where you guys talk about expectation versus reality. And Ezra, to your point, that reminds me of a bit more of my industry, which is film and media, where you have a crazy idea, and again, with the fun with movies is that you can, in a certain aspect, right, visual effects and special effects something into existence. Compared to architecture versus construction is that you have this really cool idea, but then you have to actually build the thing and make it work and not kill people. So yeah, that's fascinating. And I can very much see that as a challenge. And so speaking of that challenge, as we wrap up, for those listening, there might be other Unbounders or younger people who are interested in exploring construction as a career field or at least a job. What will you guys say to those who are considering construction?
Two things that I think are really key. The first is being teachable and just learning constantly. And the second is just diving in and doing things that you don't know how to do and just figure out how to make it work as you go. So there's an element of kind of like confidence you have to have to be able to just jump in and do it and hope you can figure it out along the way, but also never an arrogance to where you're not teachable or you're not learning, because every job is different. You're going to be learning things. You're going to have to be learning things. You're going to work with coworkers, bosses, customers who are going to have input, and you have to be willing to listen to their input and learn as you go.
100%. Love that.
If you're interested in construction, now's a pretty good time to do it. Like, there are a lot of people who are looking for people to hire in those fields. I would say think carefully about who you want to work for. Like, just take a little bit of time and think about, is this someone I want to work for? Well, unless you're doing something independently, that's different. But who you're working with makes a huge difference in how much you're going to enjoy the job and how much you're going to learn. So take some time. It's not going to be that hard to get hired if you're a hard worker and you've got good work ethic. But look around and make sure you're working for somebody that you want to spend 10 hours a day with.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that, I would actually say a couple things. Yeah, the industry has been majorly undermanned for a really long time. And so, yeah, it's not hard typically. It's slowing down a little, at least from what I've seen nationally right now. But people are hiring in construction a lot. I know the more typical counsel people give when looking at a career is actually to specialize. I would go the opposite. I would actually say generalize. At least to start with, get some broad experience in construction, because then you'll have a lot of skills you can take anywhere, as opposed to one skill you could, you're kind of in that particular place on. So I learned remodel and building, and so I can sit here and have anybody from my church go, hey, I've got this issue at my house and I can go solve that for them, whatever it be. Or I could, build myself a house, from the ground up. So I'd actually say, like, personally, I would encourage people to go kind of broad first. And then as you get into it, if you find an area you like more, you can kind of specialize down into that a little bit. And then, to Caleb's point, find somebody you want to spend time around. Looking there's usually people in your community, or at least kind of in your extended community, that would be able to connect you with somebody who'd be a good connection point to kind of start getting experience. Depends on if you're starting truly at zero experience. I would actually say probably look for somebody who owns multiple properties, who's a property owner and needs maintenance crews. It's very different from kind of standard construction, where people are looking for full-time workers. But I think there's a great opportunity there for gaining low risk experience in an industry that is really hard for the big companies to work in. Because on a couple hour repair job, it's really hard to have a big construction company that does that. I've seen that here in the Washington state, where homeowners, or not homeowners, but like property owners, will pay really high for, they still need skilled labor, but you could probably find lots of opportunity for people who they're looking for some help to come along and learn from them and work with them, because there's even a greater lack of labor there.
Oh, yes. Ezra, Wyatt, Caleb, you guys have been amazing in breaking down some of the details. And really appreciated a lot of the, again, just aspects that are seem common, but truly are things that most other people might not think about as they look at construction and how it's necessary with building things and all that. So once again, thank you for being on. This has been really fun. And yes, if for our listeners, if you guys have any questions, I would love to hear them in the comments below.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in with us this week. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with some of our alumni. Next week, we have an episode of our Conversations series. Abe, tell us a little bit about what we have coming up next week.
Yes, sir, David. So next week with Conversations, we are speaking with Sammy Cohn. Once again, one of our speakers from Apex Join the Story. This past year, Sammy sits down to talk a lot about her experiences with finding life purpose, seeking God's will, and what that means for us as young people practically in our daily lives. So you definitely don't want to miss that episode.
So once again, thank you all for tuning in with us. And as always, be unbound.